For Gotland municipality, it's very important that Gotland be a safe place to live and work. We also have a great many businesses that concern and affect Gotland's citizens. It's important, therefore, that in every meeting with these businesses, we assume our responsibilities and ensure we reduce violence in family relationships. By working with many of them, we have developed a strategy to reduce men's violence against women, and this has been adopted by our regional assembly, the highest political decision-making body in Gotland. We will do this through 3 different activities. We will do this through prevention, through reduction, and through detection. As a fellow human, you can make a difference by acquiring more knowledge. Together, we can bring about a positive change by helping a neighbor, relative, or colleague who we see is hurt from violence within the family. In recent years, we have strengthened our cooperation with Gotland municipality. Our work is based on a jointly developed overview of problems where violence in the family is one of the areas of cooperation. It's a pressing matter, and therefore we have also drawn up a citizen's promise. What we have done in our citizen's promise is focus on men's violence against women, as this is the most common form of violence in the family. The work on our Citizens' Promise and our cooperation generally falls within the Stockholm police region. Our task is clear-cut. Lives must be saved. Safety must be improved. Violence must be reduced. More perpetrators must be brought to justice. The target is 0 deaths. As investigators, we know that personal treatment for victims of crime is extremely important. Above all, it's about providing support for victims to see the legal process through to the end. Perhaps these people will eventually manage to find a way out of the destructive relationships they live in. When you go to the police and report an incident, the first thing that will happen is that you will talk to someone like me, an investigator. You'll have the chance to tell someone what you have been through. And after this conversation, we can see what action needs to be taken. As the prosecutor, I also lead the preliminary investigation, advise the police what kind of investigative measures they need to take, and also express an opinion on whether prosecution is appropriate or not. Throughout the investigation, victims of crime have the right to a lawyer who is called the counsel for the injured party, which they don't need to pay for as it is paid for by the state. When the matter proceeds to trial, the victim may feel extremely afraid of the perpetrator, whether he's at large or in custody. But we cooperate with the district court, the prosecutor, and the lawyer to ensure the victim does not have to meet the perpetrator. Violence can affect everyone. It can affect the young, and violence doesn't end in retirement. Relationships are often fast-paced. People move in together, maybe get engaged and have children. Little by little, the perpetrator starts to have views on how their partner behaves, how that person speaks or thinks, how they dress, and whom they socialize with. There is increased verbal violence in the form of constant criticism, manipulation, and often jealousy. The violence suffered is trivialized and played down by the perpetrator, and it destroys the victim's self-esteem and confidence. Even in a violent relationship, there are times when things go well. The perpetrator exploits this and controls his partner by being alternately warm and affectionate, and then threatening and violent. Victims may become dependent on and often develop very strong emotional bonds with the perpetrator, and it can be very difficult to break up the relationship. There is a theory regarding violence in family relationships that explains how violence works and how it is expressed. It is called the normalization process and is usually described as having 3 phases. These are control, isolation, and alternation between affection and violence. As a result of normalization, violence gradually takes up more and more space in the relationship. As the victim tries to adapt, the boundaries for what is normal become eroded. Adaptation often leads to isolation and a dependency on the perpetrator. A person who wants to control their partner needs to shut them off from their surroundings. This can happen in their private lives as well as at work. By finding faults and inadequacies in their partner's friends, family, and work colleagues, the perpetrator makes it hard for the victim to maintain their social life. Living space is cramped, and they also find it difficult to see the life they live reflected in other people's. Instead of the perpetrator's acts of violence, more room for maneuver. And when you know or feel that you have been subjected to something unusual, you can then get in touch with social services, individual and family care, and get a further update on your situation. Tell us how you feel, and receive support and assistance with your finances, and also accommodation if you need to leave home. When we receive a notification of concern, we basically do two things. If there already is an ongoing case and an investigation has been started, the investigation continues with the new information we have just received. If no case exists, then we make an update and start an investigation. And we are also obliged to do so if notifications are made concerning minors. A coordinated individual plan is drawn up under rights legislation for the individual citizen, and a meeting is held to enable you to give and receive information without having to repeat your story. We have traditionally been quite good at taking care of adults suffering violence. What requires more up-to-date skills and training with social services is how exactly to deal with the person perpetrating the violence. For some years, we have been supported in this by a method from Norway that is called Alternatives to Violence. For 35 years, they have been using this method to deal with perpetrators and violent offenders. And it turns out that the treatment involves a way of speaking that enables you to keep the perpetrator of violence in the room and go through a process of speaking with them that in the best case leads to a change in the behavior of the person perpetrating the violence. Why deal with violent offenders? Why should you take care of those who abuse their family? For me, there's a very simple answer to that, which is when we see that there may be methods of speaking that enable us to change the behavior of violent offenders, then these children don't have to spend the rest of their lives without their fathers, their guardians. Because it's adults who have to take responsibility for violence, and this can be changed. The role of health and medical care in family relationship cases is primarily to identify whether violence is inflicted, either physical or psychological, or if violence is witnessed, as children and young people might. If necessary, we have to act there and then, deal with the most urgent cases. Afterwards, we also need to draw up a plan for the patient, and if necessary, we also act as a witness support if the case goes to court. As regards documentation, it's important that we document cases in a specific way. It should be as accurate as possible, of course, and assessments should not be subjective. It's very important that our assessments be objective. Documentation is also possible using special search words that can't be seen from outside. So you can't use 1177 to read your record, and the patient also feels safe that no relatives are able to read it. When a patient seeks medical care, and we as the staff suspect there could be violence within the family, our action is to try to take the patient into a separate room. That is, they can be by themselves, without their relatives being present. Patients should feel secure, and if they need an interpreter, they should have one, and not have relatives translate for them. If a patient is going home, it's important to check up on their home environment. Are there any relatives who have committed violence in the family against this person? Should social services be called and assistance requested? A woman's shelter, for example. It's wise to seek health and medical care when someone suffers violence in the family. Because we know they not only suffer psychological injury, they may also have somatic complaints. We know that people subjected to violence within the family run a greater risk of ill health. At Gotlandshem, we cooperate closely with social services and the police. As a neighbor or employee of Gotlandshem, you can make a difference by reacting and acting if you suspect someone is being subjected to violence. If you hear threats being made, don't knock or ring the bell, as you risk being exposed to violence yourself. If you still choose to knock or ring the bell, there should be 2 of you at least. If it is an emergency situation, you should call the police immediately. It's also a good idea to make notes of what you see and hear, for example, the time it happens and other important details. If you suspect that children are being hurt, notify social services of your concern. Although it helps the police and social services to be told when you saw and heard it, you may remain anonymous. It's better to notify too much than too little, even if you do so anonymously. If you feel unsure about whether someone is suffering violence in the family, you also have the option of contacting us and talking to us and giving details. At Gotlandshem, it's important to us that the person suffering violence gets the help they need. The project of procedure-based work on the prevention of violence and equality in preschools aims to provide training for all teaching staff at preschools. We have succeeded in including training on the norms of masculinity in the curriculum. A norm is society's expectations of how people should conduct themselves. This is nothing negative in itself, but it can be problematic if a norm creates an uneven balance of power. And it's important that this training clarifies that norms relating to masculinity concern everyone. It's not just about men hitting women. It's also about men inflicting violence on themselves as well as other men. It is about making young men aware and secure and getting them to make other decisions than those expected of them. The school's basic task is to promote the security of all individuals. And this means we need to educate these young people about the work of preventing violence. And it's very much about getting these young people to understand what violence is, so that they can see it themselves in their own family, but also in other individuals who suffer violence. And this will enable us to reduce violence everywhere else.